It was a Tuesday morning, New York City in July of 2008. So right in the middle of the financial crisis, 6:30 in the morning, I'm leaving my Manhattan apartment to go drop off some dry cleaning. And somebody behind me on the street on 8th Avenue says, "Are you Thomas Kobe Hardin?" My full name. And the only time somebody's ever said that to me is my mother when I when I was in trouble. So I turned around. It was two FBI agents, dark suits, wallets out, like any American crime show people have seen. That scene, FBI, come sit down with us. So we sat down at a fast food restaurant in Manhattan, and he said, "Look, man, we know about your four trades. We know that you were just down in Georgia visiting your baby nephew for his baptism last weekend," and he knew my nephew's name. And my first thought was, "Oh my God, my dad's going to kill me. What's he going to say?" You know, I'm only my 20s still. And I thought, "Oh my God, my wife's going to leave me. We just got married. She had no idea." And then I thought, "Oh my gosh, this might impact my career. Oh my God, I might be going to prison."
The voice you just heard belongs to Tom Hardin. Back in 2006, Tom was a hedge fund analyst at a Wall Street firm, a world where high-powered deals are struck in hushed conversations. It's a place where what you know matters, but when you know it and who told you can make all the difference. When the FBI tapped him on the shoulder, Tom was embroiled in trades generating over $1 million in illicit gains. What he didn't know is that the encounter that morning would lead to 20 individual criminal cases and turn him into one of the most prolific cooperating witnesses in modern financial crime history. He would go on to wear a covert wire on more than 40 occasions. It would mean the end of his Wall Street career and the beginning of a new identity, Tipper X. This is BCG on Compliance, a podcast that explores today's most pressing financial crime trends and how compliance professionals are adapting to stay ahead of that curve. I'm Hanyo Seibert. Before we get into Tom's dealings with the FBI on that July morning, it's important that we get a sense of who he is and how he got to that point.
I'm American. I grew up in the southern U.S. outside of Atlanta. I didn't know anything about Wall Street. My parents were working class. My dad worked at the Coca-Cola company in procurement. My mother had a childcare business in our home, and I was the first of my extended family just to leave the southern United States and attend college.
Where did you move from wanting to be an accountant to working in a career in Wall Street?
So I graduated UPenn and went into investment banking. I was recruited by a friend at a hedge fund in Connecticut. So this is around the top of the tech stock bubble in the early 2000s, going back over 20 years now. Started as a tech stock analyst. I became aware very early in my career, again in my 20s, that certain hedge funds in the tech stock space were kind of blatantly trading on illicit inside information, where they would hire analysts at the hedge fund from Silicon Valley companies who could call back to their contacts inside those companies to get inside information on upcoming earnings announcements or upcoming M&A. It's maybe shocking to hear. People would talk about the contacts that they had in these companies, the information they had, the edge, they used to call it. I never really felt I had to cross that line early in my career because I was a good analyst, a good stock picker. I was always thinking long-term with my investing in tech. At my second and final hedge fund, I was 28 years old, a junior partner working up in my career. And when we started investing after the first quarter, we lost money. And honestly, it shouldn't have mattered because I mentioned, our investors had a 3-year lockup. So I didn't think they cared about that. My boss came into my office, closed the door after that first quarter and said, "Oh my God, basically, we lost money in the first quarter. We have to start looking for shorter term opportunities to make money every month or we may not survive."
That pressure and incentive is a critical part in the fraud triangle and the critical moment in Tom's story. His boss moved a 3-year goal into a monthly one, creating an environment where a riskier decision could be made and undue chances taken. When you first entered Wall Street, was it like you expected it when you arrived, or and you dwelled a little bit into this already, but what were the parts that you were more like you expected in terms of culture and the interaction with your colleagues, and what were some of the things that maybe surprised you when you first entered?
When I got to the hedge fund industry, I really loved it because it was such a flat meritocratic structure where if you made money for the company, you could make millions of dollars in your 20s. And I remember when I was 22 years old interviewing at this hedge fund, the founder of the fund was 10 years older than me, 32 years old. He made $75 million dollars the previous year. And that was just that amount of money coming from a working class family in Georgia was just, I've never even heard of something like that. And so I will say early in my career, I was driven by the potential, wealth possibilities in this business, but more so than the economic opportunity, I was just really enthralled in just picking stocks, competing against others in the markets. I loved that where it was different than investment banking, where you had to sort of work your way up the hierarchy. There was no hierarchy. It was a very flat structure with a founder and a team of analysts underneath.
I assume the founder or others were influencers, but let me openly ask a question. When you entered the industry as a graduate out of university, who were your early influences in that industry, or role models, or who did you look up to?
My earliest influences were, I would say, frankly, bad ones. And that's not to excuse my actions, but I met people who, as I said, in the first few tech stock conferences I'd attend, that I would see talking about the ideas of trading on illicit information. And they seemed to have status at the time in my industry. So as a young professional, I would look at these analysts a few years older than me, maybe 30 years old, had much more status because they had this information and they were more about puffing their chest out as okay, I have the information on this company or that company. So that really influenced me, not in a good way, obviously, which we'll get into later, but I met someone who used to work for this, the most famous guy to be charged, probably Raj Rajaratnam, a Sri Lankan billionaire in these cases in the US. And I suspected when I met her when I was 23 that she was also trading on inside information. And so one of the things I think about today, early in your career, and really at any point in your life, is you're the average of those five people you surround yourself with, right? So I could have told you at 23 of the five people I was around, if there was one person who was going to later tip me on information that I shouldn't have, I could have told you at 23 years old in my gut, I knew it would be this person who would ultimately be my tipper. So I did not choose the people I surrounded myself with wisely.
What was your first ethical dilemma? And it's probably this whole point when this guy came into your office and closed the door. But how did you navigate through it? And what did your kind of your actions say versus your inner moral compass? And how did you navigate through that situation?
A few more months after that meeting, I got a phone call from this woman who had worked for Raj Rajaratnam, who had this reputation of insider trading. She called and said, I have something for you, but you can't tell anybody. And it was a blatant tip. She said, a Moody's analyst at the bond rating agency who was roommates with her cousin told her that Kronos, a listed company, was going to be acquired in a few weeks. Here's the date. Here's the price. Here's the private equity firm. It doesn't get much more stark than that. Up to that point, I knew her to be a rumor monger, always calling with the latest rumors out of Silicon Valley. But this sounds like stark, explicit information. I didn't make any trades, so it's sitting in my lap here, kind of the answers to the test, so to speak, that's happening in a few weeks with this deal. I didn't make any trades that day because it sounded like illegal information. So I'm still holding on to, okay, I should probably still be playing by the rules, but it fell into my lap. And my first major bad decision was later that day. I happened to be catching up with a friend at another firm, a prop trading firm. He only makes money every month. If he's up for the firm, that's when he gets paid. He's down that month. He's telling me a sob story about he's losing money. He and his wife just found out that they were going to have a baby. And so he's in this situation where he needs some short term ideas. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to trade this. but if you want to trade this, here's what this woman told me. I told him everything. Just pausing right there for people listening in compliance. If you were my compliance officer, you'd be having a heart attack because now I've shared this information with him and I could be actually charged, at least civilly, with insider trading for tipping. And I have no idea what he's going to do with it and who he's going to share it with. And it turns out within the next few hours, he shared it with basically everybody at his firm. The stock starts trading up the next few days about $1 a day. There's call options going off. So I see this happening in the market, and he's IMing me every day. So back then we used AOL Instant Messenger. He's sending me IMs. Are you in? Are you in? Are you in? The woman that gave me the information is saying, you got to be in, you got to be in, you got to be in. And they both said they're going to make millions of dollars if my information's right. And I hate to say it, but here, I just had some FOMO of fear of missing out that these guys are going to make millions. And I'm just going to sit here and watch this. And so what I could do, and I'll just pause here, is that I could actually in our portfolio buy a stock and not have to talk to my boss as long as it was less than 1% of the assets that we manage for clients. And I remember calculating and buying a 0.9% position in the portfolio in Kronos. And so that was the opportunity for me to commit securities fraud. When I put that order in to our trading software, buy 14,000 shares of Kronos, and I clicked the mouse button, I committed securities fraud.
Tom, thank you so much for sharing. I know this is very personal and goes very deep. I have a question, and maybe this is a bit of a biased question in terms of how did you feel with those decisions, but more what I'm interested in, how did you justify this for yourself? Because I think somewhere down, deep down, you knew this was probably not right, but then it sounded like there's always circumstances or something that makes you act on it. So can you explain a little bit more around how you then argued with yourself or said, okay, it's still fine the way how I act right now?
Sure. I think in respect to the fraud triangle, the rationalization was a big piece for me. So I told myself, it seems like everybody's doing this. I said, who am I hurting? So with insider trading, you can tell yourself, I'm just buying this stock before everybody else in the market. I said, I'm just taking a flyer. I kept saying this word, I'm taking a flyer. So I was using a euphemism for my illicit conduct. Never did I once say, hey, I'm insider trading. I could still think of myself as a good person and place this trade. I mean, I said I'll do it just this once and never do it again. And really, as the wheels are turning in my head, I said, I have no idea who she's talking to. She's always full of rumors. I'll just answering the phone, make a trade one time. And one of the biggest takeaways beyond these rationalizations, I think, is I made a decision in isolation. Like I didn't talk to my boss, certainly didn't talk to compliance, didn't talk to anybody else at my firm. I made that decision in isolation. And over the years now of engaging with companies, I think one of the biggest takeaways I've had where I engage with a company who maybe have had some previous misconduct with employees is this idea of people making decisions in isolation.
I think both for the individual, the risk of the individual making decisions in isolation, but also for the company and the governance of the company, quote unquote, allowing for people carrying so much power that they can actually single-handedly decide.
I think isolated decision making, it's very hard to gauge because it's internal, it's personal. And why people do it, it's because you remove accountability, right? The information came in with me, didn't talk to my boss, didn't talk to anybody. I just acted. And I think when there's nobody to check you, like if compliance doesn't really have that true check and challenge role of the first line, the rationalizations can sound louder. So we can convince ourselves of anything. We don't have to be criminals to convince ourselves to do something. So that's why I stress it now. It's not really talked about that much, but isolation is a huge risk factor and unethical, or in my cases, illicit decisions.
Isolation can be a significant factor in risky or unethical decision-making. In a post-COVID world where more people are working remotely across different time zones and locations, isolation is a risk factor that compliance professionals need to consider. While isolation didn't cause Tom to make the decisions he did, it contributed to keeping him on a path a path that eventually led to the FBI tapping him on the shoulder in July of 2008. Let's pick up the story from there.
It was a Tuesday morning, New York City in July of 2008, so right in the middle of the financial crisis, 6:30 in the morning. I'm leaving my Manhattan apartment to go drop off some dry cleaning. And somebody behind me on the street on 8th Avenue says, "Are you Thomas Kobe Hardin?" My full name. And the only time somebody's ever said that to me is my mother when I when I was in trouble. So I turned around. It was two FBI agents, dark suits, wallets out, like any American crime show people have seen. That's seen FBI come sit down with us. So we sat down at a fast food restaurant in Manhattan, and he said, "Look, man, we know about your four trades. We know that you were just down in Georgia visiting your baby nephew for his baptism last weekend," and he knew my nephew's name. And my first thought was, "Oh my God, my dad's going to kill me. What's he going to say?" You know, I'm only my 20s still. And I thought, "Oh my God, my wife's going to leave me. We just got married. She had no idea." And then I thought, "Oh my gosh, this might impact my career. Oh my God, I might be going to prison." So it went from those thoughts. I start making implicating statements to the FBI. Yes, I made those four trades. He's writing it all down. I didn't play tough guy, prove it. You know, I just started confessing that day. And he said, I might have the opportunity to help them build some of these cases. And he showed me a web of names that were all whited out, but it was sort of these insider trading tipping charts with the circles and the arrows. He had two big targets at the top. He closed it up and he said, "You can help us out, Tom." He gave me his card. I asked the FBI, "Should I talk to a lawyer first?" And the FBI said, "We'll let you know when you can do that." So they're not supposed to say that, but that was how it started for me.
I'm really picturing this. You're sitting down in a diner. I couldn't just show up to work normally, but I'm sure you also can't miss it, right? So,
Right. So it's a good point. July of 2008, we're not doing well. It's the worst stock market in 75 years. I got to the office after that meeting just before the market opened. My boss says, "Where were you?" I just said, "Oh, my wife was sick." So I just made something up. But you're right. I couldn't sit in front of the Bloomberg that day. My face was white, but my face was white every day in 2008 because of the stock market. So I don't think I had any red flags. Went to the restroom, just washed my face. And I thought I have to talk to somebody. The FBI told me I could only tell my wife. I thought how am I even going to do that? I couldn't tell anybody else. But I just converted to Catholicism for marriage. So I thought the idea of a confession sounded great. So I went to St. Patrick's Cathedral, if people know it, there in Manhattan, walked in, told the priest everything. And he said, "Wow, basically my penance," he told me, was it sounded like most of my life I've done the right thing. 1% of my life I really made the wrong decisions. But if the FBI has given me a chance to clean up the industry, that I should do it. So I didn't talk to a lawyer. I didn't yet tell my wife about this, but I did talk to a priest. And so I called the FBI back and said, "I can talk to you guys. I'm not sure what they meant by helping them." And I did confess I talked to a priest. They said that was fine. So met with the FBI the following Monday for lunch, and they had this small piece of metal they were showing me. And back then we still had Blackberries, if people remember. And so I thought that was an old battery with the Blackberry that they had. They were looking at me like, this guy must be so naive. They said, "Tom, this is a recording device." I was going to have to wear it. And I said, "Is that a body wire? Like The Sopranos, that show?" So that was still popular. And they said, yes. And they wanted me to build relationships with people, infiltrate some of these Silicon Valley networks of information sharing. So I had to build relationships with 48-year-old hedge fund managers in Silicon Valley while I was a 29-year-old analyst in New York. I just did what they said. I wore this wire, built relationships, and did this for 2 years. And to be honest, I didn't think this was going anywhere. I never got feedback from the FBI as to how I was doing. There was no performance review for wearing a wire. But in 2009, 2 years into this, the FBI told me, turn on CNBC. 20 hedge fund professionals were in handcuffs with the FBI windbreakers, and the news cameras just happened to be there that day. What we called them perp walks. And CNBC on the financial news network said Tipper X was responsible for helping the FBI with all these cases. I didn't know I was Tipper X. And I called the FBI, said, "Am I Tipper X?" They said, "Yes." And they told me to talk to a lawyer now. I called a lawyer and said, "Hey, I'm Tipper X." They said, "We should talk." And the lawyer said, "You've been doing this for 2 years without a lawyer." I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're supposed to hire me the first day the FBI approached you." I said, "Hey, it's my first time doing this. It's my first time doing this." So long story short, I pled guilty December 2009 to securities fraud. My name became public a month later. You just kind of lose so many contacts, connections. People were so disappointed that I was involved with this. But you do figure out who your true friends are. I don't recommend going through this to figure that out, but 4 people reached out. Oh my gosh, I see your name out here. If you need to grab a coffee or a drink, let me know. And I wasn't sentenced for 7 years. So basically, all of my working years in my 30s were pretty much gone because I had to wait to be sentenced till 2015. And I was sentenced to no prison because I helped the FBI build 20 of their 80 cases. And to be honest, I was so ashamed of myself. I never thought about ever sharing this story until a year after I was sentenced. I got a phone call from a restricted number. It was the same number on my caller ID that the FBI used to use. I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do now? Was I speeding or downloading movies or something? And then I talked to the FBI and they said, hey, why don't you come talk to our rookie agents? Your case was so fascinating. Of these 80 people we arrested, I was the youngest and I made the least amount of money. I personally made $46,000. And I said, well, thanks for rubbing it in, FBI. I was trying not to get caught. And they said, well, that's actually really interesting. What are these pressures? What does it look like when your boss looked the other way? What are those rationalizations we discussed? And the FBI gave me the idea just to go out and try to change up the compliance training and financial services just with a real story.
Wow. Wow. Lots of questions. So, one, what happened with the personal charges? Were they then taken away given the collaboration and the support, or how did you end up with that?
When the FBI approached me, I didn't talk to a lawyer for 2 years, but we didn't know how helpful I could be for them. I didn't know. I had no idea I could do anything for them. And then once I had done so much, I still had to take a felony conviction, unfortunately. So it's beyond just a regulatory enforcement action for me. It's actually a securities fraud conviction. So I do have a felony on my record, which has its own challenges in terms of just even having a bank account. Like I can't have a bank account in any of the major banks in the US because I'm on every AML list in the world and I'm a potential money launderer at any major bank for the rest of my life. And so I have a credit union where I have my accounts, but can't have a stock trading account for equities, but I'm only allowed interested to trade crypto. And I actually can't coach my kids in sports because I have to check the box to have a felony conviction. So there are life consequences. I have to check, certain countries I might have issues traveling to. So it's not, and I'm not saying these are complaints. I'm not trying to be a victim or something. I made these decisions I shouldn't have, but it just are these life consequences with the criminal conviction.
Okay, no, and I didn't hear it as making excuses or complaining. And I asked because I think it's still interesting on what happened at the end of the day. And the other question I had was, you said in the beginning you didn't tell your wife, but did you not tell your wife for the full 2 years until the news came out? No, you must have at some point.
No, I had to talk to her. So yeah, so that was a Tuesday morning. The FBI is in the street in New York City. I waited a few days because I wasn't sure how to approach it. We just got married. We had no children yet, so it would have been very easy for her just to leave. And there's a stat I found once that 85% of marriages end in this situation where the spouse picks up a white collar charge. And so Wednesday and Thursday, I'm having panic attacks, sweating into bed. So she knows something's up, and I'm not really talking about it. I'm going to work early before she wakes up. I'm coming home late after she goes to sleep. By Friday, the weekend's coming. And she had been working at one of the major banks that went under on Wall Street that fall. And so she was at that bank at the time. And so it was stressful for her, obviously. And so Friday after work, young couple in New York City, how was your week? And I told her, let me go first. I have something to tell you. I told her everything. And she said, can you say it again? And I said it again. And she said, wow, that wasn't what I was expected, but you didn't do anything to hurt me. No, I think she was thinking maybe I was having another, infidelity or something, but the way she accepted it is very rare. I've hardly met anybody in my situation. I've met other people who have gone through situations like this where the spouse stayed with them. So I'm very lucky that it was not easy, of course, but she was able to somehow manage to stay with me through all this, which was kept my outlook as positive as I could be because most wives in that situation would have walked out the door.
One thing I always wonder with people that have been undercover or informants is, and obviously your name is public for a decade now, or more than a decade, but have you ever worried about or experienced retaliation? Because there's a lot of names flying around, right? There's a lot of information that you probably have provided to the FBI, but how do you deal with that part?
So when my name became public, January 2010, there was a few threatening With the sort of text and emails I received, and I explained that to the FBI, forwarded that to them, and they said, "Oh, everything is fine." So I haven't, I haven't, so I've sort of taken their word, but I kind of felt like the people I helped them with were also, if it wasn't me, it was going to be somebody else helping the FBI with. And the way I thought about this, and maybe it's not the right way, but I thought, okay, if I'm going to go down for $46,000, I'm going to help them sort of build the cases against people who are making millions. And people might have an issue with that. Am I bringing other people down because I'm in this situation? But I felt the best decisions I could start making was just helping the FBI clean up the industry. But to be clear, I'm not a whistleblower. I'm an informant. Sometimes I'm introduced at conferences. Tom's a whistleblower. I did not do this out of moral courage on my own. I only, work with the FBI because I was caught in this. But I tried to make the best of the situation. Once I was in it.
Shifting gears yet again a little bit on, as you said, also cleaning up the industry. Organizationally, what do you think organizations or your organization could have done to prevent this or earlier detect these unethical decisions that individual people are taking, individual people like you at the time?
I think really at my firm, the lack of oversight was a major weakness. So we had this control where I could buy stocks in our portfolio as long as there were these small positions. So there was really not any type of audit of the controls. So that's one thing. But more than that, nobody was asking questions. Had somebody checked in and actually confronted me about the trades, maybe I would have confessed. I don't know. It's hard to rewrite that history, but or if they made me feel seen or accountable, I might have stopped. Also, I think clearer messages from leadership. My firm is very small, but I think there's a takeaway that ambiguity, do what it takes. And we see that mindset in other industries. That was dangerous. So that's one thing organizationally, individually. Individually, if you ever feel like you have to make a decision in isolation, then that's probably a decision that you should take a lot more time on, looking at slowing down this idea of system one and system two thinking, just slowing down and using more of that part of your brain. If you're getting near that line where you feel like you can't talk to anybody, then you should talk to somebody. What would have stopped me from making these trades in my 20s if I had the right mentor? Outside my industry, I mentioned I surrounded myself by not the greatest of people. If I told my mentor, you won't believe what people are doing, it seems like everybody is, quote, doing this. This woman just called me. I'm thinking about taking a flyer. The right mentor would have slapped me around. People are usually shocked that I only made $46,000 on these trades. That's the number one question. People say, why'd you do it? And I just didn't see my career. And if you picture an iceberg underwater and right above the tip of the water is that 46,000, but underwater is your career, your reputation, your livelihood. That's one way to frame it. And to prevent these things tomorrow, I would recommend just creating environments where people aren't making these decisions in isolation. That means encouraging questions, making compliance approachable, making compliance not the police officer, but actually the chief career protector of people's careers. I would encourage anybody in compliance listening to call yourself the protector of careers at onboarding. You have all these new professionals, especially the bigger organizations. You're there to protect people and help people make these decisions and take it off their plate if you need to. We need to be comfortable in any industry just about talking about these pressures openly. There should not be a stigma about talking about these things, and always use real stories in training. Don't just talk about the rules. People relate more to consequences when they're personal and not just theoretical. So that's basically why I do what I do now.
What's something that any firm could implement today or say tomorrow to do better in preventing some of these ethical failures?
What I'm a big fan of, and I obviously have workshops around this myself, is to create discussion groups around your own customized ethical dilemmas in your organizations and to have people talk through those, to also train your junior people with kind of muscle memory. Okay, here's the situation. Here's how we want you to respond in the situation. You can't cover every potential scenario, but I think that's one thing. So much of the training still to this day is box check training. Here's the rules, here's the regs. My sort of quote competition in training is often the internal video that people check the box watching. So it doesn't really bring it to life. So I think the more people can actually embed in the training real dilemmas. And even now I'm doing choose your own adventure situations where if you make that decision, then here's the next set of decisions you have to deal with. Like that's much more relatable than having compliance as this box checking exercises, which unfortunately people just do that so they can meet the demands of the regulator, but they're not really thinking beyond that. So I would always encourage that it comes back to the training, onboarding all these young professionals where compliance actually would have a voice, which they usually don't. And hey, I'm here as your career protector. I think that's like a great reframe that I'm always espousing and evangelizing for the compliance industry.
Great. Compliance as career protector. I'll take that one. We're going to make something out of that.
Do it.
Are you creating a culture where your employees are isolated and unethical choices might stay undetected? Join the conversation by connecting with us on your podcast app, writing a review of the show, or emailing us at bcgoncompliance@bcg.com. Be sure to subscribe to get more insights from compliance innovators. Tom's memoirs, Wired on Wall Street, will be out in February 2026. I'm Hanya Seibert. Thanks for listening.